The morning sun cast long shadows across the forward operating base as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez gathered his 8-man SEAL team in the briefing tent. The air conditioning hummed against the brutal Afghan heat, but sweat still beaded on foreheads as the team studied satellite imagery spread across the metal table. Intelligence indicates high-value target Abdul Rashid is holed up in this compound. Rodriguez pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley 15 kilometers northeast of their position. He's been coordinating IED attacks against our supply convoys for the past 6 months. Command wants him alive for interrogation. Petty Officer Jake Thompson, the team's explosives expert, leaned forward to examine the photos. Looks like a fortress, Chief. Stone walls, multiple buildings, elevated position. How many hostiles are we expecting? Intel suggests 12 to 15 fighters, Rodriguez replied, though something in his voice suggested uncertainty. Local Afghan forces will provide perimeter support, but this is our show. We go in fast, extract the target, and get out. The team's communications specialist, Petty Officer Sarah Chun, studied the topographical map. Extraction point is 2 clicks south. That's a lot of open ground if things go sideways. Rodriguez nodded grimly. That's why we're going in at 0200 hours. Darkness gives us the advantage. Apache support will be on standby if we need it. He gestured toward the corner where Captain Jessica Martinez, an Apache pilot, stood quietly observing the briefing. Martinez had arrived at the FOB 3 days earlier with her gunship crew. At 28, she was one of the youngest helicopter pilots in the unit, but her reputation preceded her. She had logged over 300 combat hours across 2 deployments, earning respect through precision flying and steady nerves under fire. Ma'am, Rodriguez addressed Martinez directly. We may need close air support if the situation deteriorates. Can your bird handle night operations in that terrain? Martinez stepped forward, her flight suit bearing the patches of the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment. Absolutely, Chief. My gunner and I have been studying the area. The valley walls create some challenges, but nothing we can't handle. We'll maintain station at 5,000 feet until you call us in. The weapons sergeant, Petty Officer David Kim, traced potential approach routes on the map. What about civilian presence? These compounds usually house extended families. Drone surveillance shows minimal movement after 2,100 hours, Rodriguez answered. The target typically operates from the main building on the compound's north side. We breach there first, secure the area, then systematically clear each structure. As the briefing continued, each team member memorized their specific roles. Thompson would handle any barriers or locked doors. Chin would establish communications and coordinate with command. Kim would provide suppressive fire support. The remaining team members, Martinez, Jackson, Lopez, Williams, and Hassan, would form the assault element alongside Rodriguez. Outside the tent, the distant sound of rotor blades filled the air as Apache helicopters conducted routine patrols. The mechanical rhythm seemed to underscore the seriousness of their upcoming mission. Rodriguez had led dozens of similar operations, but something felt different about this one. The intelligence seemed too clean, too simple. Chief, Chin approached him as the formal briefing concluded. I've been monitoring radio chatter from the area. There's been increased communications activity around that compound for the past 48 hours. Rodriguez frowned. What kind of activity? Multiple frequencies, coded transmissions. Could be routine, but it feels like they're preparing for something. Chin's experience in signals intelligence had saved the team before. Her instincts were rarely wrong. Keep monitoring, Rodriguez instructed. If the situation changes, we adapt. That's what we're trained for. As the team dispersed to prepare their equipment, Captain Martinez remained behind to study the mission parameters more closely. She had flown support for countless SEAL operations, understanding how quickly situations could escalate from routine to life-threatening. Her Apache's 30mm chain gun and Hellfire missiles provided devastating firepower, but precision was everything when friendly forces operated below. The afternoon passed quickly as each team member conducted final equipment checks. Night vision goggles, tactical radios, medical supplies, ammunition, everything had to be perfect. In the armory, weapons were cleaned and test-fired. Chun programmed backup communication frequencies. Thompson prepared breaching charges with surgical precision. As darkness approached, the weight of the mission settled over the team. They had trained together for months, operating as a seamless unit. Trust was absolute. Each man and woman knew their teammates would risk everything to bring everyone home safely. Rodriguez gathered his team one final time before departure. Remember, we go in quiet, we get our target, and we get out. Stay sharp, stay focused, and watch each other's backs. The mission was about to begin. Hashtag Into the Darkness, the insertion went flawlessly. 4 Black Hawks dropped the SEAL team 2 kilometers from the target compound at exactly 0200 hours. The helicopters disappeared into the night within seconds. Their rotor washed the only evidence they had ever been there. Rodriguez led his team across the rocky terrain, each operator moving like a shadow through the darkness. The approach took 45 minutes of careful movement. Night vision goggles turned the landscape into an eerie green world where every rock and bush stood out in sharp relief. The team maintained strict noise discipline, communicating only through hand signals and whispered radio checks. Chun monitored radio frequencies as they moved, her equipment detecting the electronic signatures of the compound ahead. "Chief, I'm picking up multiple cell phones active in the target area," she reported through the team's communication system. More than expected for a dozen fighters. Rodriguez processed this information without breaking stride. Intelligence had been wrong before. They would adapt as needed. The mission parameters remained the same. Capture Abdul Rashid alive and extract safely. As they crested a small ridge overlooking the compound, the full scope of their objective became clear. The satellite imagery had been accurate regarding the layout. A main building surrounded by smaller structures, all enclosed by stone walls. What the photos had not revealed was the level of activity below. "Count at least 20 heat signatures," whispered Petty Officer Martinez through his thermal scope. "They're not sleeping. Looks like sentries posted at multiple positions." Rodriguez studied the compound through his own optics. Armed figures moved between buildings with purpose, not the casual movement of a sleeping household. This felt like a prepared defensive position. "Chun, any indication they know we're coming?" "Negative on direct communications about our presence," she replied, "but there's definitely elevated alert status down there." The team took positions along the ridge to observe and plan. Thompson identified the best breach point, a section of the compound wall where shadows would conceal their approach. Kim selected overwatch positions for suppressive fire if needed. Each operator memorized the layout, identifying cover points and escape routes. Apache 77, this is ground team leader. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio. "We're in position for final approach. Request you maintain station at previous coordinates." 5,000 feet above them, Captain Martinez acknowledged the transmission from her Apache cockpit. Her gunner, Chief Warrant Officer Paul Stevens, scanned the compound through thermal imaging systems. "I count 24 heat signatures," Stevens reported to Martinez. "That's significantly more than briefed." Martinez keyed her radio. "Ground team leader, Apache 77. We show 24 heat signatures in your target area. Confirm you still want to proceed." Rodriguez considered the options. The mission was critical. Rashid's capture could prevent dozens of future attacks on coalition forces. Intelligence suggested this was their best opportunity to take him. "Roger, Apache 77. We're proceeding with the mission. Stand by for possible support requests." The SEAL team began their final approach at 0315 hours. They moved in 2 elements, Rodriguez leading 4 operators toward the main building, while Kim's fire team established overwatch positions. The plan called for simultaneous breach and clearing operations to minimize enemy response time. Thompson reached the compound wall first, quickly placing small explosive charges at predetermined points. The shaped charges would create precise openings without the noise of conventional breaching methods. Chun monitored communications to ensure their approach remained undetected. "Charges set," Thompson whispered. 30 seconds to breach. Rodriguez positioned his team for immediate entry. Each operator knew their specific room assignments and clearing procedures. Speed and violence of action would be their primary advantages against superior numbers. "Execute," Rodriguez commanded. The charges detonated with muffled thumps, creating 3 separate entry points simultaneously. The SEAL team flowed through the openings like water, immediately engaging targets as muzzle flashes lit up the compound. The element of surprise lasted approximately 15 seconds before the full extent of enemy resistance became apparent. "Contact front. Multiple hostiles." Kim's voice crackled over the radio as his Overwatch team engaged targets moving between buildings. Automatic weapons fire erupted from defensive positions that had been carefully prepared and concealed. Rodriguez's assault team found themselves facing not 12 to 15 lightly armed fighters, but a well-equipped defensive force that had been expecting them. Rashid's compound had been turned into a carefully planned trap. Heavy machine gun positions opened fire from elevated positions, while fighters with rocket-propelled grenades maneuvered to cut off retreat routes. "This is ground team leader," Rodriguez shouted into his radio as bullets cracked overhead. "We are heavily engaged. Request immediate close air support." Above the battle, Captain Martinez heard the desperation in the SEAL team's radio calls. Through her aircraft sensors, she could see muzzle flashes throughout the compound as the situation deteriorated rapidly below. The thermal imaging revealed the true scope of the ambush. Nearly 50 fighters were converging on the SEAL team's position from multiple directions. "Apache 77 inbound for gun runs," Martinez announced, pushing her aircraft into a steep dive toward the valley floor. Her gunner Stevens acquired targets through the aircraft's sophisticated targeting systems, preparing to unleash the Apache's devastating firepower. The situation on the ground had gone from controlled assault to desperate survival in less than 3 minutes. The SEAL team found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, and fighting for their lives in a carefully prepared kill zone. #The Trap closes the compound erupted into chaos as heavy machine gun fire raked the SEAL team's positions. Rodriguez dove behind a concrete barrier as rounds chipped away chunks of masonry inches from his head. The carefully planned assault had become a nightmare scenario. They were trapped in an expertly designed kill zone with enemy fighters closing from all directions. "Kim, report," Rodriguez shouted into his radio over the deafening gunfire. "Overwatch team is pinned down," came the reply. "RPG team moving on our position from the east. We need immediate support." Thompson had taken cover behind a damaged vehicle near the main building, but enemy fire kept him from advancing. "Chief, the primary target building is locked down tight. Multiple defensive positions we never saw coming." Chun crouched beside Rodriguez, her communications equipment crackling with intercepted enemy radio traffic. "They've been planning this for weeks," she reported grimly. "I'm hearing coordinated movement orders. They knew exactly when we were coming. The intelligence had been compromised. What should have been a quick capture operation had become a fight for survival against overwhelming odds." The enemy had transformed Rashid's compound into a fortress designed specifically to trap special operations forces. Above the battle, Captain Martinez maneuvered her Apache into attack position despite the dangerous terrain. The valley walls created severe flight limitations, but she had trained for exactly these conditions. Her gunner Stevens identified targets through thermal imaging as muzzle flashes lit up the compound like deadly fireworks. "Ground team leader, Apache 77 is in position for gun runs," Martinez transmitted, marking friendly positions with infrared strobes to avoid friendly fire incidents. Rodriguez activated his team's infrared markers, invisible to enemy fighters but clearly visible to the Apache's sophisticated sensor systems. "Apache 77, friendlies marked. We need immediate suppression of heavy weapons positions on the compound's north and east walls." Martinez acknowledged and began her attack run. The Apache's 30mm chain gun spun up with a mechanical whine, that struck fear into enemy hearts worldwide. Stevens acquired the first heavy machine gun position, a PCAM machine gun team that had been devastating the SEAL team's movement. Target acquired, Stevens announced calmly despite the chaos below. Engaging. The chain gun opened fire with a sound like ripping canvas, sending armor-piercing rounds into the machine gun position at a rate of 625 rounds per minute. The devastating accuracy of the weapon system eliminated the threat within seconds, giving Rodriguez's team momentary relief from the murderous fire. But the enemy had prepared for helicopter intervention. As Martinez pulled out of her attack run, rocket-propelled grenades streaked toward her aircraft from multiple positions. She threw the Apache into a violent, evasive maneuver, the helicopter dancing through the air as explosions bloomed around the aircraft, taking heavy anti-aircraft fire. Martinez reported, her voice steady despite the life-threatening situation. Multiple RPG positions targeting our aircraft. On the ground, the situation continued to deteriorate. Enemy fighters had surrounded the compound, cutting off all escape routes. What had initially appeared to be a standard compound now revealed itself as an elaborate trap with prepared fighting positions, interlocking fields of fire, and carefully stockpiled ammunition. Rodriguez made a tactical decision that could save or doom his team. All units consolidate on the main building. We make our stand there. The SEAL team began a fighting withdrawal toward the primary target building, each movement covered by suppressive fire from their teammates. Thompson used his explosives to create diversionary blasts, temporarily disrupting enemy coordination. Kim's Overwatch team provided sniper fire against enemy leaders attempting to organize the assault. Chin intercepted increasingly urgent enemy radio traffic. Chief, they're calling in reinforcements from surrounding villages. Estimate 200 additional fighters en route. The number hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. His 8-man team was already facing overwhelming odds. 200 more fighters would turn their desperate situation into certain death. They needed extraction immediately, but enemy anti-aircraft fire made helicopter rescue impossible. Martinez recognized the deteriorating situation from her aerial vantage point. Thermal imaging showed dozens of heat signatures converging on the compound from all directions. Vehicle-mounted weapons were moving into position to create additional killing zones. The SEAL team would be completely surrounded within minutes. Stevens, we need to break their coordination, Martinez told her gunner. Target their command positions and heavy weapons systematically. Roger, engaging multiple targets, Stevens replied, his hands flying over the weapon system controls. The Apache began a series of devastating attack runs, the chain gun and Hellfire missiles striking enemy positions with surgical precision. Each pass drew intense anti-aircraft fire, forcing Martinez to execute extreme evasive maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and crew to their limits. Below, Rodriguez's team reached the main building and established defensive positions. The structure provided some protection from small arms fire, but enemy fighters were already positioning explosives to bring down the walls. Time was running out rapidly. Apache 7-7, ground team leader, Rodriguez transmitted urgently. Enemy forces are preparing to assault our position with explosives. We need immediate extraction or massive fire support. Martinez surveyed the tactical situation with professional detachment despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The SEAL team was trapped in a building surrounded by nearly 200 enemy fighters. Standard extraction procedures were impossible due to the anti-aircraft threat. Conventional fire support would be insufficient against such overwhelming numbers. She made a decision that would either save 8 American lives or cost her own. Ground team leader, Apache 7-7. Prepare for danger, close fire support. Mark your exact positions and take hard cover. We're coming in with everything we have. The most intense phase of the battle was about to begin. #Unleashing Hell. Captain Martinez pushed her Apache into a steep dive that would have terrified most pilots, but she had trained for exactly these impossible situations. The valley walls created a natural funnel that limited her maneuvering options, while enemy anti-aircraft fire filled the air around her helicopter. Every instinct screamed at her to pull back to safer altitude, but 8 American lives depended on her willingness to risk everything. "Stevens, we're going in danger close," she announced to her gunner. "SEAL team is marked with infrared strobes. Everything else in that compound is hostile." Chief Warrant Officer Stevens had flown with Martinez for 18 months across 2 combat deployments. He understood her flying style and trusted her judgment completely, even when it seemed suicidal to outside observers. Roger, acquiring multiple targets. Chain gun loaded with high-explosive dual-purpose rounds. Below them, Rodriguez's SEAL team had barricaded themselves in the main building as enemy fighters closed from all directions. Explosive charges were being positioned against the walls while machine gun teams established overlapping fields of fire. The enemy commander had clearly planned this trap for months, studying American special operations tactics to create the perfect killing ground. "All units, hard cover now," Rodriguez shouted as the Apache dove toward the compound. Incoming fire support. The SEAL team pressed themselves against interior walls and beneath heavy furniture as Martinez began her attack run. The Apache's chain gun opened fire at maximum rate, sending a stream of 30mm rounds into enemy positions with devastating accuracy. Stevens methodically engaged each target, his years of training allowing him to distinguish between friendly and hostile positions even in the chaos of close combat. The high-explosive rounds detonated among enemy fighters like deadly flowers, each impact eliminating multiple targets while creating massive psychological pressure on the remaining attackers. The carefully coordinated enemy assault began to falter as their heavy weapons positions were systematically destroyed. But the enemy adapted quickly. Anti-aircraft teams focused their fire on the Apache, forcing Martinez into violent evasive maneuvers that tested the helicopter's structural limits. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked past the cockpit as she jinked left and right, using every ounce of her flying skill to keep the aircraft functional. Taking hits in the tail rotor, Martinez reported as warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. Hydraulic pressure dropping on secondary systems. Despite the damage, she continued her attack run. The SEAL team's survival depended on suppressing the enemy long enough for reinforcements to arrive. There was no backup plan, no alternative extraction method. Success or failure rested entirely on her ability to keep fighting despite a damaged aircraft. Stevens acquired a cluster of fighters attempting to breach the main building. Multiple hostiles at building entrance, engaging with danger close fire. The chain gun rotated with mechanical precision, sending rounds within meters of the SEAL team's position. The accuracy required was extraordinary. A small error would kill the Americans they were trying to save. On the ground, Rodriguez felt the building shake as 30mm rounds impacted just outside their defensive positions. Through the windows, he could see enemy fighters being torn apart by the devastating firepower of the Apache's weapon systems. But for every fighter eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. "Chin, what's the status on reinforcements?" Rodriguez called out during a brief lull in the firing. "Quick reaction force is 20 minutes out," she replied, her voice barely audible over the sound of explosions. "Apache support is keeping them off us, but I'm counting over 150 heat signatures still active around the perimeter." The mathematics were simple and terrifying. Even with the Apache's devastating fire support, there were too many enemy fighters for one helicopter to eliminate. The SEAL team would have to hold their position for 20 more minutes against overwhelming odds while Martinez continued to engage despite her damaged aircraft. Martinez recognized the tactical reality as clearly as Rodriguez. She had expended half her ammunition, and her helicopter was operating on backup hydraulic systems. Normal doctrine called for withdrawal to rearm and repair, but withdrawal meant certain death for the SEAL team below. She made a decision that violated every safety protocol she had ever learned. "Stevens, We're staying on station until the cavalry arrives. Forget ammunition conservation. We go full rate of fire until we're Winchester. Roger, Stevens replied without hesitation. He understood the implications. They would expend every round of ammunition, use every Hellfire missile, and push their damaged aircraft beyond safe operating limits. It was potentially a suicide mission, but it was the only chance the SEAL team had. The Apache began a series of continuous attack runs that lasted nearly 15 minutes. Martinez flew the helicopter like a weapon itself, using the aircraft's speed and maneuverability to confuse enemy anti-aircraft teams while Stevens engaged targets with mechanical precision. Each pass drew intense fire, but they pressed their attacks with relentless determination. Enemy fighters began withdrawing from their positions as the psychological pressure became unbearable. The constant sound of the chain gun, combined with the devastating accuracy of the Hellfire missiles, broke the coordination of their carefully planned assault. What had been a disciplined military operation devolved into chaos as individual fighters fled for their lives. Ground team leader Apache 77 Martinez transmitted during a brief pause to assess battle damage. We've suppressed immediate threats around your position, but ammunition state is critical. How long until reinforcements? Rodriguez checked his watch. 12 more minutes. Apache 77. Quick reaction force is 12 minutes out. Can you maintain fire support? Martinez looked at her instrument panel. Multiple warning lights indicated system failures. Ammunition counters showed critically low levels, and fuel was becoming a concern. By all logical standards, they should withdraw immediately. But logic had no place in this valley tonight. We'll be here until you're safe, she replied simply. The final phase of the battle was about to begin. #victory at dawn. The ammunition counter in Martinez's Apache showed less than 200 rounds remaining for the chain gun, and her last Hellfire missile had been expended 3 minutes earlier. Warning lights continued to flash across her instrument panel, indicating hydraulic leaks, electrical system damage, and engine temperature concerns that would normally require immediate landing. But she kept the helicopter in the fight, determined to protect the SEAL team below regardless of the cost to herself and her aircraft. Stevens, we need to make every round count now, she told her gunner. Prioritize targets that pose immediate threat to the ground team. Stevens had become a master of precision gunnery during the prolonged engagement, learning to distinguish between active combatants and fleeing fighters through the thermal imaging system. Roger, I see approximately 30 hostiles still maintaining fighting positions. Concentrating fire on heavy weapons teams. Below in the compound, Rodriguez's SEAL team had survived nearly an hour of continuous combat through a combination of superior training, tactical discipline, and the devastating fire support provided by Martinez's Apache. But the enemy's numerical advantage remained overwhelming, and ammunition was running critically low for both air and ground forces. Chief, I'm down to 2 magazines, reported Thompson, the explosives specialist who had been providing suppressive fire from a window position. Same here, confirmed Kim from his overwatch position. We need those reinforcements now. Chun monitored radio frequencies while conserving her remaining ammunition. Quick reaction force is 8 minutes out. 2 additional Apache helicopters and a company of Rangers are inbound. 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours. The enemy had regrouped after the initial shock of the Apache's devastating attacks, and were preparing for a final assault on the main building. Martinez could see through her thermal imaging that approximately 50 fighters were positioning themselves for a coordinated rush that would overwhelm the SEAL team's diminished firepower. She made a decision that epitomized the warrior spirit that had earned her respect throughout the aviation community. Stevens, we're going in for a final gun run. Use every round we have left. Ma'am, that will leave us completely Winchester, Stevens pointed out. No ammunition for self-defense if we take more damage. Those 8 Americans down there are more important than our ammunition reserves, Martinez replied without hesitation. We finished this fight. Martinez pushed the damaged Apache into its final attack dive, ignoring the protests from multiple aircraft systems. The helicopter shook violently as she exceeded safe speed limits. But the maneuver would give Stevens the best possible firing angle against the massed enemy fighters. Stevens opened fire with the remaining chain gun ammunition, each round precisely placed to maximum effect. The 30mm high explosive shells tore through enemy formations like a scythe, eliminating multiple targets with each burst. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical damage. Enemy fighters who had maintained discipline throughout the long battle finally broke and began fleeing the compound in panic. "Last rounds expended," Stevens announced as the chain gun fell silent. "We are Winchester on all weapon systems." But the gamble had worked. Enemy resistance collapsed as their final assault force was decimated by the Apache's last ammunition. Scattered fighters continued to flee toward the valley walls, abandoning their weapons and equipment in their desperation to escape. On the ground, Rodriguez cautiously emerged from the main building to assess the situation. The compound that had been filled with nearly 200 enemy fighters was now littered with abandoned weapons and equipment. Thermal imaging from the Apache confirmed that organized resistance had ended. Apache 77, ground team leader Rodriguez transmitted. "Enemy forces appear to be withdrawing. Outstanding fire support. You saved our lives up there." Martinez felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as the adrenaline of combat began to fade. Her aircraft was severely damaged, completely out of ammunition, and operating on backup systems, but they had accomplished the impossible. 8 American Special Operations personnel would return home because she and Stevens had refused to abandon the fight. "Just doing our job, Chief," she replied with characteristic modesty. "Glad we could help." The distant sound of rotor blades announced the arrival of the Quick Reaction Force. 2 fresh Apache helicopters swept over the valley, followed by transport helicopters carrying Ranger reinforcements. The cavalry had arrived, but the battle was already won through the courage and determination of those who had refused to surrender. Rodriguez's SEAL team secured the compound and captured valuable intelligence materials, though Abdul Rashid himself had escaped during the chaos. More importantly, every American fighter was walking out alive despite facing odds that should have been insurmountable. As Martinez nursed her damaged Apache back to base, she reflected on the night's events. The mission had started as a routine capture operation and evolved into one of the most intense combat experiences of her career. She had fired over 4,000 rounds from the chain gun, used all 16 Hellfire missiles, and pushed her aircraft far beyond safe operating limits. The after-action report would document the tactical lessons learned and recommend improvements to intelligence-gathering procedures. But for Martinez, the only statistic that mattered was simple. 8 Americans had entered that valley, and 8 Americans had come home. Stevens broke the contemplative silence in the cockpit as they approached the landing zone. "Ma'am, that was some of the finest flying I've ever seen. Those SEALs owe their lives to your decision to stay in the fight." Martinez smiled tiredly as she lined up for landing. "We're all on the same team, Stevens. We watch each other's backs, whether we're on the ground or in the air. That's what we do." The Apache touched down gently despite its battle damage, ending one of the most heroic close air support missions in Special Operations history. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors that seemed to celebrate their survival and victory against impossible odds. In the weeks that followed, Captain Jessica Martinez would receive the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions that night. But for her, the greatest reward was knowing that her willingness to risk everything had brought 8 fellow warriors home safely. In the brotherhood of combat, there was no higher honor than the trust of those who depended on your courage when everything was on the line.